Parrot TV, the voice for humanity.
Hi, welcome to New York Parrot Literary Corner. Today we have Paul Stroble. He is a theologian as well as a poet with Finishing Line Press titles. And he can tell us more about himself since I lost the bio just now. But anyway, if whatever you want to say about yourself, these things kind of happen sometimes. So please feel free to add anything that you would like to talk about.
Well, thank you so much, Dustin. This is a great opportunity, and I'm glad you reached out and this is happening. I've had an odd career as a poet, I suppose, because I wanted to write poetry when I was 15, which is the early 1970s, when I was growing up in Vandalia, Illinois, my hometown, which is in South Central Illinois. And I was, doing genealogy and was in high school and just, really kind of loved hometown landscapes and was reading Edgar Lee Masters and his Spoon River anthology and some Walt Whitman and William Cullen Bryant, some of the old great 19th century poets. And I just really wanted to write poetry. Then I started college, had a wonderful college professor named Elva McAllister who encouraged me to write more poetry, which I didn't. Then I went on to my master's degree and got married and went on to doctoral work and various professional work and church work and teaching and different kind of academic writing. And then I fell into church curriculum writing for about 20 years. Published a little bit of poetry in the late 90s, around the year 2000 or so, but took a poetry course when we lived in Ohio with Tom Dukes, one of my BFFs who still critiques my poetry. And, by about 2012, I was telling myself I've wanted to write poetry for literally 40 years and have just never gotten going on it. So, at that point, I took the time and just really began to, read some favorite poets again and jot down some ideas and show them to my friend Tom, et cetera. And then in 2014, I suppose about 2 years later, I was still practicing submitting poetry and met Leah Wetta Demains, excuse me. Leah, who's the awesome publisher of Finishing Line Press, liked my first efforts, and I've been associated with them for a few years now. So she was really a great help there, where I was trying to revive my poetry dreams.
Excellent. So it's good to have a supportive network of publishers and other friends, fellows, and other poets to guide you along and push you forward. It's definitely wonderful that I know a lot of Finishing Line Press authors who are fabulous. I've, since I've first came acquainted with them, I've seen a lot of their work, and I really am impressed with a lot of what they do. So we invited them to submit several of their authors to us to interview. I'm curious, you studied theology as well. So I'm wondering, does theology and philosophy intersect in your poetry, or how did they ever use themes from your learnings in those subjects?
That's one of my goals in continuing to write poetry, is to be a little more comfortable writing, something a little more explicitly spiritual. I think there's a spirituality in a lot of my poetry, especially the spirituality of place, which is actually one of my church curriculum books, is How Do We Know God Through Favorite Places, and our feelings about different locations where we grew up or which are meaningful to us otherwise. And I think that theme is really strong in a lot of my poems. But I would like to still dig a little deeper, and had read some of the poets who are very comfortable in writing things more explicitly spiritual, I think, and trying to figure out how to do that well, I suppose, rather than sentimentally or too abstractly.
Right. Very
Yeah.
difficult. Very difficult. Yeah. So how does the everyday Midwestern life encourage you to write thoughtful poetry? Speaking of place.
Yeah. I was, really very attached to my hometown over there, Vandalia. I'd say over there because it's about 70 miles east of where I am currently. Just you're just growing up with a lot of family in the area, both living and several generations back. Somehow all my ancestral families ended up there in Fayette County, Illinois. So I just had a really feeling of that this has been home for a lot of generations. And then I suppose it's having the basic experiences of, looking for a summer job and, trying to impress girls when I was a teenager. And there actually was a soda fountain in my hometown, which is one of the subjects of one of my poems. And my dad was a truck driver, and so highways and related places like filling stations are appear in different poems. So if one peruses my different chapbooks and my one full-length book with finishing line, there's a lot of those just familiar Midwestern locations and and family kind of fictionalized family stories.
Right.
Yeah.
So that sounds like a little bit, in a way, a little bit of a twist on Edgar Lee Masters. He wrote a lot of those, in Spoon River Anthology, he wrote a lot of these, interactions with families. I mean, of course, all of these were, people that had passed and they were speaking of themselves from being, from being deceased. But it's sort of like a similar, feeling, I guess you could say, because I think he was I think those characters were based in the Midwest as well, if I remember. I don't remember right off the top of my head, but I mean, they had a very, very Midwestern feel to them, of course.
Yes, very much so. Yeah, up in I think Petersburg, Illinois, I believe, which is near New Salem, where Lincoln spent his young adult years. Yeah, and the the voices from the grave, and I'm not as scandalous as Masters was, and
Right.
in my subject matter, I could be, but I guess I just don't want to go there. There's
He seems to have kind of fallen into the cracks a little bit. I mean, in the last, I don't think he's had anything come out. I mean, they haven't had any new work of his or anything released in a while, which is interesting because I happen to have come across a person who has access to some of his archives, and we're about to publish some of his collected works or selected miscellaneous stuff pretty soon. I just was letting you know that because you might be interested in that at some point.
Oh, that'd be
Yeah, my publishing company. It'll be fun.
Yeah.
But he's a great poet. I read him very young too, and I enjoyed the Spoon River Anthology very much, and this new stuff is really interesting too. That's we're publishing, so it's coming out pretty soon, I hope.
Yeah, indeed. I think he was their other prolific poet. That was his famous work. But yeah, I'll look for that.
Yeah, and you mentioned William Cullen Bryant. I mean, so you got a pretty wide range of the poets that think deeply on things. I read him in high school as well, and I remember thinking of him and the Fireside Poets and so forth. And those guys. So does the literary aspects of the Bible actually, does that play any role in your structuring of your work, or do you have any, like you might write like in a psalm form or something of that nature?
I have not yet really. I love I guess it's called the Hebraic form of the
Right.
Psalm, the doubling of the meaning or the tripling of meaning.
Wonderful. I love it too.
Yeah, yeah. I think when I was really depressed in the early 80s, I wrote a long psalm kind of poem about, God, why are you putting up with me? And I don't know what probably luckily that poem has been lost to time, but
Right.
remember that was a fun poem to write, and it actually helped me kind of get through some stuff. So that would be, a really interesting form to write. In fact, I was writing down some poets I like, and the Sultan of Dubai is a wonderful poet. My wife brought me back a book of his couplets, which is what reminded me of them. He tends, I don't know if they're based on the Psalm so much, but that couplet form is something that he is. I've read some of his that in the same vein of hoping maybe that form would, stir some ideas. Yeah.
Mhm. Are you familiar with Jane Kenyon, the poet
Yeah.
Jane Kenyon? Yeah, she has
Yeah.
some poems that kind of follow the structure of Psalms.
Mm-hmm.
Some interesting poetry. She had a way of layering things in a way that was really, you know, brought out meanings that you wouldn't normally associate with the subject matter.
Mm-hmm.
It's very
Yeah.
interesting stuff.
Yeah. I really like hers. Charles Wright too.
Hmm.
I really like his too. Yeah.
Right.
Mm.
So, what are some of the prominent themes in your finishing line press books?
Um, three of my books. The first three, uh, hometown scenes. Again, very fictionalized. Um, different locations. Playing. Can't remember what I wrote. Playing in the park and
Hmm.
playing with my chemistry set and
Childhood oriented or memories and
yeah, very fictionalized memories. And instead of just writing in the first person, I'd make myself a little girl playing it with trying to do experiments with her chemistry set and and going to family reunions. Again, I would not necessarily use the names of my kinfolk just so no one would get the right idea, but very strongly based um, on those memories, but trying to write them in a way that was not just about me, but different locations and some family stories that were fictionalized too. The full length collection was about a visit to the grave of one of my ancestors who was actually killed while turkey hunting in 1859.
hmm,
And it struck me, oh, Charles Darwin was working on the origin of species about the time that my ancestor died. And I really love it. Well, I guess that is a theme that I do incorporate. I've been incorporating in some of my poetries is science and religion. And in that poem, I kind of took the fact, that he died in this particular year and tried to figure out some connections with how Darwin and what Lincoln was doing that year. And,
there's a network, an interconnected network of events going on all taking place at the same time, maybe in different locations while your
yeah.
ancestor was alive and had just been died in the hunting accident, I guess. And that's interesting because then that's a kind of poetic in itself. You've got all these major historical events happening at this point in history, and it's
Mhm.
embodied in this person, in a way.
Right.
It says a lot about people, I think, and a lot about life, how complex it can be.
Hmm. Yeah, it really does. It's genealogy doesn't really connect with larger historical events necessarily, but in this case I
Mhm.
tried to do this. Well, April 1849, what was going on in the world? Well, it turned out that Dickens had just finished A Tale of Two Cities, and Darwin was writing, and John Brown was raising money and for his cause, and then just using the specific date, I realized that, 90 years later, Franklin Roosevelt had happened to die on that particular day. And it was just really interesting. The historian in me find all these connections, but then trying to weave them together in kind of a spirituality kind of way too, our interconnection with all things. And tried to connect that with Darwin too, and his, the way he, taught the interconnectedness of the species.
I think that's interesting because I felt the same way. A lot of people feel science and religion are at odds, and it's like I really don't agree with that. I think that Darwinism and evolution proves that life is ultimately a unified thing. It's like we're all descending from common ancestry or common species, and we gradually evolve, and then these species break off into different critters, I guess you could say.
Right.
But we're all kind of like a part of this unified great grand plan,
Right.
this grand thing going on. We don't know where it's going, but we hope somebody does, I guess. Can kind of guess. What it is what it is, and we don't know. We're part of it. We can't really speculate much. I guess I could say that. So I wondered if you would agree with that, with the sentiment that God intends all things for a purpose, and what would that mean to you?
Yeah. That's really hard.
It is, and that's why I thought I'd ask you that. I
Yeah.
just wondered what you thought of that, because that is a difficult question. I've wrestled with it myself. So
Yeah. It's easier to kind of think about that in one's own life than to tell somebody else.
Right.
I could be thankful about my father died several years ago, and I could be thankful that he died just fooling around in the kitchen, and died rather suddenly. He didn't have to suffer, and I could feel spiritually comfortable thinking about that. But if I told somebody else, it's such a blessing your dad died in the kitchen, they would think, oh, I don't want to think about God taking my dad's life because I really needed him for longer than I had him. So it's really hard, and with Darwin too, it's the cycles of life and death and struggle, is what keeps the whole process moving. And it's sad when the hawk, eats the chipmunks. It's, which happens in my lawn. It's sad for the chipmunk, but that's how it all operates.
Right.
And it's, but to say that struggle and death and sometimes waste is part of God's plan, that's tricky too.
Because we have a very high value of God, like our perception of God, the ultimate good, and we tend to not want to think that these various things that we dislike or find distasteful are not really part of that. But maybe we need to revise. I don't know, maybe like Jung was right in some capacity, with the answer to Job, and he said God is kind of a dark and light. I don't know, I really don't know. I'm speculating off as well. I don't know any more than anybody else. But I think it's interesting. Are you familiar with the poet Robinson Jeffords?
I know of him. I need to read him, or somebody has recommended him to me. Yeah,
I think you'd like him. He's got a lot of theological themes. He studied theology, and he studied forestry, and he's a very interesting poet. I think you'd like.
I'll look for him. Yeah, taking notes.
Yeah, I've read a little bit of him. He's great. So if you'd like to share a poem or two with us, we'd be obliged to hear.
Okay, well, let's see. Well, here's one. It's terrible to be so absent-minded as I am. Here's one.
Me too. Don't worry about it.
Oh, it's terrible. Here's actually one that is more psalm-like.
Okay.
That I should write more poems like this, because many of my poems are rather narrative, but this is a little more psalm-like. This is Solomon Snow
Mhm.
at the end of my small corner of the stars collection. Deep snowfall, 10 degrees. Our pastor isn't sure whether to cancel church or not. We're not sure either. No one is. But our neighbor lady lives for the house of the Lord. Snow stacks upon the field of those who have walked through valleys of shadows, and pastor shepherds them. She perfects her sermon on goodness and mercy, watches, prays, makes a snowman with the youth. Afternoon turns to evening. The early moonlight is a voice that is not heard, but heard everywhere, like the column of the stars, the timber of the county. Hills and ravines arrayed more than Solomon. God asks, have you visited the storehouses of snow? Can you loosen the cords of Orion? We make angels in white, loved by the one for whom comes the hoarfrost of heaven, channels of snow, Christ in cold. Folks in pastor phone, let's try to meet. Miss Audie will come anyway. And what is snow but still waters? Okay.
Wow, that has a lot of the flow of life, things coming and going and returning, and a lot of the water force in the snow. Interesting poem. I like this. I like the reflections you put in there.
Thanks.
So that's a wonderful poem. Thank you very much for sharing that.
Thank you.
So if you'd like to read another one, feel free.
Let's see. All right, let's see. And here's another one that has a little more of a spiritual, at least, conclusion.
Okay.
It's called County Seat. This is my book, Little River. Bicycle tires, small town birds, singing in neighbors' trees. A car beeps in the distance. Riding, the boy sees the way the sidewalks have raised as neighbors' trees grow beneath and push upward. And as he pauses from his hot ride through undulating streets, he likes the coleus and moss rows that line the walk of 263 6th. Beneath the phone poles, lined in matched order down Washington Street, the oak and maple are still full green shade. He pedals to the outskirts, where the expired line crosses St. Louis Street, and he stands in blue to gaze down the bright right-of-way. At the cemetery, folks have already decorated, kin needful of flowers, flags. His grandparents at the lane's turn have forget-me-nots. He remembered this as a bored day, no one around, nothing to do, when his home became for him always as the shadow of God's wings.
Oh, a little surprise at the end there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, it surprised me writing it too, because
It happens a lot, actually.
yeah, I just, as again, a hometown memory of just, nothing to do in summer and riding my bike around and trying to get down this experience. And oh, okay, that's where this poem is going, with this image from I think Psalm 91 is that image of God's wings protecting people.
I think there's I can't remember which poet said that a lot of times when you're writing a poem, you want to surprise yourself. I can't remember who that was. I think it may have been Billy Collins. I'm not sure.
Oh, yeah. Oh, he's wonderful. He's wonderful at that.
Yeah, I like those twists and turns that poetry can have. That's part of that's part of the fun of writing it, because novels can be a little more predictable and paced, and then poetry can just throw you for a loop sometimes. Just take you everywhere at once.
Mm-hmm.
So I enjoyed that poem, and I liked that the reference to Psalm was really nice. That was an excellent poem. So thank you for sharing that. So I noticed you write quite a bit of scholarly articles on theology, and I wondered, I especially noticed Karl Barth's name coming up quite a bit in your writing. So it's kind of an off the poetry question off to that subject. What sort of Karl Barth books would you suggest for someone who was just getting into this sort of the aesthetics and the philosophy of Christianity?
A book he wrote in the early 60s called The Evangelical Faith is a really good introduction, I think, to his writing. And he's, word evangelical for him would more mean Protestant than what we mean by it in the States, as being sort of the conservative, politically active Protestants. He would be thinking more of the Protestant heritage, what he means by that word. But that would be a good 250 page book that would be a good introduction to his work. There was and I forget the name, the title of it, but he used to preach to the folks in the jail in Basel, Switzerland, where he lived, and he felt like that was his congregation, interestingly. And there's a collection of his sermons that was, again, I can't remember the title, but it would be easy to find, I'm sure, on that are good opening into his thinking of the unmerited love of God for everybody.
Interesting.
Yeah,
I was just curious. I thought it would be interesting to talk about that a little bit, because that's part of your, I guess you could, your creative work. So what are your writing habits like? Do you sit down every day and write a certain number of words, or do you write just when it feels like you're called to in your mind? Or
yeah, good question. I try to get a little bit of writing done every morning. I think that's when I have the most mental energy. I used to get up 5:30 or 6. And until I joke that I got a CPAP machine finally, which it's cured my sleep apnea, but has made me want to sleep really late every day. So there when the 5:30 mornings, I can hardly get up by 8, but it's still mornings that I try to get half hour to an hour at least of some kind of writing, or poetry reading, or research, the creative research that I can use eventually. And now that we're out in public again, the little Starbucks down the street where I like to study is open for customers again. So I can actually go in and sit for a while and do some writing. I've actually credited that store in every one of my books, because that's where I've sat and done so much of my good work the last 6 or 7 years.
What kind of ruminations dwell with you that you reflect on, that you constantly go back to, and that when you're writing or when you're researching? Is there something driving that creative impulse to constantly dig into things? Or
Yeah, I suppose like nostalgia is such a thing with me in my my home territory. Is one thing. The spirituality part of it certainly is another, that I feel like in my life and work that writing is something that I can do, and I can make a difference in people's lives, and in some way that I will probably never know necessarily, because with books just going out into the world.
Right. Very unpredictable.
Yeah, very unpredictable. Right. Yeah, I might as well be open about it. I've had high functioning depression since I was a kid. And and I've realized the last few years I can really help people by just being open about this and saying, yeah, this is something that's, a lot of us do struggle with, and we might as well just, say that this is happening, and
Right.
there's no shame into it, and things like, just basically writing really cheers me up. It's something that,
Mhm.
I guess that's the high functioning part, that, ooh, I can get going on this and feel real good. It's but that is, part of it. That's, as long as, this is something that I deal with and have dealt with for a long time. That's and creativity is kind of hooked in there too. Being creative, and even being on the way to creating something is just a really, happy thing to be doing. It's part of my whole personality, and and things I like and things I struggle with, and things I take enjoyment from.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's definitely, I think it's definitely good to destigmatize the mental
Hmm.
health components. I mean, it's like a lot of people don't understand it, and a lot of people struggle with stuff like that and they don't realize it. And,
Yeah.
talking about it helps people think a little more about it and not
Hmm.
be so quick to say, oh, well, you're lazy, or you're, whatever the judgment will be. I know I've had a lot of family who's had depression and all kinds of mental health troubles and struggles, including myself. So I mean, I'm
Okay.
open about that. I've had dealt with schizoaffective for many years, and
Yeah. Yeah.
very, very tricky. And
Yeah.
I totally understand. And you might catch flack for it, and you might get a lot of understanding for it. And it's good to
Hmm.
talk about those things. So I appreciate you opening up about that.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah, so we have remaining 3 or 4 minutes if you want to maybe like offer some, words of advice to fellow writers, or some encouraging words, or thank a few people out there that have helped you move forward in your career as well as your life in general. Just people that have encouraged you.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Um, yeah. My friend Tom Dukes, who I mentioned earlier, who's a professor emeritus of English in Akron. Andrea Scarpino is another, really great friend, who used to be the poet laureate of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Almost said Missouri. Missouri has no Upper Peninsula. She's a great friend. Jane Ellen Iber is a poet laureate of St. Louis, and she's a great friend too. I mentioned Dr. McAllister from my college, and Jim Coleman is no longer living, but he was my ninth grade English teacher, who I kept in touch with over the years. And um, Sharon Ladegi is a hometown friend who really encouraged my writing when I was in junior high. Um, the St. Louis Poetry Center is a great community here in town. David Kluhl, who just passed away fairly recently, was former poet laureate of Missouri, and he was a um, great friend, about my age, but he'd been writing poetry his whole life, and here I'm coming in my late 50s, trying to do it for the first time, and he was a lot of support too. Just a lot of poets I like too, who I've never met. Michael Van Walligen of University of Illinois is another poet I really have always liked. And gosh, I got such a list of names
Such a
here.
list. Well, if
Such
you
a
want,
list.
you can
I
also
think
offer a
but
few
those
words.
are the highlights.
Right. If you want to offer a couple words of encouragement, to other authors out there, our
Mhm.
audience, just like say, whatever you think would be encouraging to them.
Yeah. I think just don't give up on your dreams. That sounds, cliche, but
Hmm.
it took me 40 years to really get going on poetry, and I had several false starts, but I just kept it out there, and I told another friend that sometimes I can write only a little bit every day, and because life's really busy, it can 15 minutes, half hours, even that's hard to do. But it, over time, it ends up as a book. You just be surprised at how even just little dabs of effort, every day or every other day will add up, even when you don't seem like you're making much progress at all. It's just you're surprised at how much that really means. So just kind of keep at it and find somebody who will encourage you, and those kind of things.
Well, thank you for joining us today,
Yeah.
Paul. It's been wonderful talking to you,
Well, thank you.
and just good luck with your poetry and your writing, and we'll see more scholarly works on theology and all assortment of works on place, poetry of place, and what you have to offer to the world. So keep an eye out for you, and thank you again for joining us. It's been a wonderful talk.
Oh, this is a lot of fun. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you as well as for joining us. And today we had Paul Stroble, and we had an excellent talk about the Midwest, poetry of place, and wonderful talks about theology and poetry from all over America. Walt Whitman, all kinds of interesting figures we all know about. This has been the New York Parrot Literary Corner, and if you are not subscribed, you're missing out. Please subscribe out there. All you viewers out there, we're looking for 1 million subscribers. 1 million. We're going to do this, right? We're going to do this all together. We're the only and best platform globally for creative minds. So please subscribe and get in touch with us if you want a platform at Literary Corner at newyorkparrot.com. That's Literary Corner at newyorkparrot.com. And we hope to hear from you soon. And if you have any extra cash, we would love to have you just throw it our way. We love money. We're looking for some new equipment and so forth, so we'll go to good use. That would be at paypal.me/nyparrot, paypal.me/nyparrot. That link will be on YouTube and on all of our shows. Thank you again for joining us, Paul. This has been the Parrot Literary Corner. I'm Dustin Pickering. Everyone, have a good evening and come back with us tomorrow. We will be any other part of the world. You never know. Thank you again.
Thank you.